back in the day, if you installed a boat anchor 14 bolt in the back of your 4x4, shaving the housing was considered a mandatory act. People's attitude was that they'd rather run a Dana 44 in the rear of their rig than an unshaved 14 bolt. You know, and it really was easy to hate a 14 bolt back then because Dana 44s were considered big axles and 35s were considered big tires. But in the last 10 years, where 40-inch tires are common on Jeeps and most rock buggies are running 42s or 43s, the 14 bolt came to the forefront as the axle of choice for cheap durability. So why are we still shaving them? Well, the internet really exaggerated things when internet forum idiots started posting the typical anecdotal crap about how their buddies kept getting stuck because of these huge 14 bolts. You know, in the minds of the uneducated masses on the internet, 14 bolts practically dragged on the ground unless you shaved them. You know, the trolls kept spouting out how great Dana 60 ground clearance is and how horrible 14 bolt ground clearance is. But what none of the internet trolls actually did was go out and physically measure the ground clearance to find out the truth. Well, I'm going to tell you the truth right now. Depending on the year of axle manufacture, the Dana 60 only has a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch more ground clearance than the 14 bolt does. That's right, your typical low pinion Dana 60 will only give you about a 1/2 inch more clearance than your typical 14 bolt will. Basically, the difference in ground clearance between a 14 bolt and a Dana 60 won't even be noticeable on the trail. So hopefully we can lay this off-road wives' tale to rest once and for all. So if you want to compare ground clearance on different diffs, the way to do it is you measure from the ground to the center of your hub, and basically that'll give you a measurement from the ground to the center of your axle shaft. Then you're going to go around to your housing and you're going to measure from the ground to the very bottom of the housing. And you're going to subtract these two numbers, and basically that'll give you the distance between your axle center line and the bottom of your housing. And that's how you determine ground clearance on an axle. And also, let's face it, you installed a 14 bolt in your rig for the strength. And cutting down your housing, you know, 1.5 inches, 2 inches at its most critical point, and then shaving down your ring gear to a smaller size, that decreases axle strength. You know, and why would you want to do that? Also, when you do these serious shaves that take 1.5 inches or more off the bottom of the diff of a 14 bolt, when you do that, you know, it tends to leak a lot if you wheel the big boulder gardens in the deserts out west. You know, your 13 bolt might be fine running through the woods back east, but when you start dragging it through the sharp rock gardens in California and Arizona deserts, you know, leaks are sure to start. In the deserts out west, these 14 bolts take some serious abuse. You know, I prep and paint my rock buggy, all the scratches after every trip. And this is one day out in Ridgecrest off-roading. You know, I really don't think a shave kit would have helped me here. You're basically just maneuvering back and forth all day in these huge boulder fields. So, you know, I got this 14 bolt for strength. So I decided I'm not going to cut it down, and I've been fine. And the skill it takes to make a huge cut on the bottom of the housing properly, getting it nice and square, machining down gears, and doing some major mild steel to cast iron welding, it's not something that most garage hobbyists possess. You know, it's not a skill that most people possess. Probably 75% of the shave jobs I've seen over the last 30 years have been absolute crap. Be mindful that there's two types of shave kits for the 14 bolt. One of them takes off a substantial amount of material off the back in order to get maximum ground clearance. And those kits require you to weld on a mild steel plate to this cast iron, and to do some machining on the ring gear in order to make it work. And I don't really recommend those anymore because everybody's running big tires nowadays. But if you notice on these newer 14 bolt housings on the bottom of it, they have this lip here. The ribbed 14 bolts have this little lip right here. And there's some kits that just shave this lip off right here. And that's all it does. It doesn't require any welding, any modifications to your ring gear. It just makes it easier for your housing to slide across rocks without getting caught up on this lip. The older 14 bolt housings without the ribs, I think, what is it, the 1977 to 1988 or 89, they have a smooth bottom down here without this lip. So those really don't need to be modified at all. But, if you want to get one of the various diff covers out, 13 bolt diff covers out there that kind of just do away with this lip at the bottom, I could see doing that. So if you want to use the Crane or Barnes 13 bolt covers that basically just take the bottom lip off the diff, this really is a great option. So in conclusion, what are my thoughts on shaving a 14 bolt? Well, if you're simply removing that little lip on the back of the newer 14 bolt housings, I'm all for it. I mean, you're not really cutting into the structural integrity of the housing. You're not shaving any ring gears. You're not doing any tricky welding of mild steel plate to cast iron. Basically that mod isn't even really for ground clearance. It's just to remove that little lip on the bottom of the housing that'll get hung up on rocks. It's basically just to smooth the bottom out so it transitions through the rocks easier without hanging up. But if you're doing the more involved 14 bolt shave where you cut a lot of the bottom of the housing off, do a lot of welding, shave the ring gear, in an age where almost every rock buggy out there is running 42s or 43s, you have to ask yourself if weakening your axle that much for a little bit more ground clearance is worth it. To me, it's not. And that's basically why I stopped shaving my 14 bolts.